Hello and welcome to Present Parenting, where our mission is to give children the mindful care they need. My name is Amy, and today I'm going to introduce the self-discipline stage, which is the fourth of 6 stages on the accountability pyramid. This video gives just a brief overview. To really understand present parenting, participate in a Marco Polo Sharecast where you can ask your questions privately and listen to my thoughts and answers to the group at your leisure. You can also follow along on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, where I will continue to share all of my content for free. As I continue to create content, I will also post it on my website at www.presentparenting.org. Besides the tantruming toddler years, it is definitely the turbulent teen years that get the most attention in parental circles. "Oh, you just wait until they're all teenagers," is a comment I frequently heard from older parents when my kids were little. What is it about puberty that gives teens a reputation that frightens parents? And how can we work with our teens when they are wired to pull away from us? I'm flashing this pyramid pic as a quick reference of how far we've come in preparation for puberty and the self-discipline stage. We've been working hard and making so many sacrifices to get to this point in our child's development. But before I focus on what it means to parent a child in the self-discipline stage, I of course want to walk through the brain science first so you understand the why behind the self-discipline stage. So let's start by taking a look at what's going on inside the adolescent brain so we can get some clues on what drives the majority of teen behaviors. If I were to ask you to name a brain change in teens, I bet I could guess what your response would be. Probably raging hormones, right? Which is correct. A heightened release of hormones is responsible for triggering the many physical and emotional changes teens experience with the onset of puberty. But besides hormones and the obvious outward signs of puberty, did you know that the brain's hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and learning, is near its peak performance during the teen years? This makes sense because it sits deep in the center of the brain, so its development has been front and center since birth. A highly functioning hippocampus explains why adolescents and young adults have a much easier time cramming for finals than older adults do, because older adults are losing hippocampus capacity with age. The amygdala, which is in charge of emotions like fear, passion, impulse, and aggression, also sits in the center of the brain and is thus highly developed and therefore a very dominant influence on teen behaviors. And to make teen life all the more risky and exciting, the Center for Feeling the Joy of Rewards, which is a part of a brain system called the ventral striatum, that, yes, is also deep inside the middle of the brain. Are you noticing a pattern here? Well, it peaks as well during adolescence. So most teen brains produce and crave more dopamine than ever in their young lives, which encourages them to be significantly more excited and motivated by rewards regardless of negative consequences. This explains why teens insist on impressing their friends and are known for rolling their eyes at the sound of any threat meant to stop them. But what about the top, front, and outer layers of brain tissue? The parietal lobes, responsible for motor skills and sensory processing, and the ever-anticipated prefrontal cortex that is in charge of emotional regulation and mindful decision-making. What are they up to during adolescence? Well, after some significant progress and critical practice during the preteen years, these brain areas undergo massive construction or pruning during the teen years, and this makes these frontal and outer brain areas less useful at random times. Of course, this can create an unpredictable imbalance between the primitive brain and the mindful brain. Can you imagine a teen whose amygdala and ventral striatum influence impulsive decision-making because they reign supreme in controlling behaviors every time the prefrontal cortex is taking a construction break? I think we can all picture that. Indeed, center of the brain dominance alongside prefrontal cortex sporadicness is exactly why teens have successfully shocked adults with their behaviors for decades, and why parents brace themselves during the teenage years. Sorry for such a whirlwind on brain science, but that's what life is like for teens too. Now let's take a closer look at what I mean by massive construction in the frontal lobes, because this brain development concept should shape the way we discipline our teens. Like I mentioned on the previous slide, another word for massive construction is pruning. And if you're into gardening at all, the concept of pruning in gardening is very similar to the idea of pruning in brain science. In gardening, various branches get trimmed away to make room for the healthiest branches. In brain science, remember that babies are born with more brain cells than adults end up with, and that those brain cells are largely unconnected until both their genetics and their environment triggers the use of cells to make connections that turn into behaviors? Well, with repeated use of the same brain cells over and over again, a fatty substance eventually coats those connections so that the connections get stronger and more efficiently useful. This process is called myelination. We see this happening in real time when a baby learns to walk. At first, the ability to balance is haphazard and unpredictable. But with time and that extra fatty layer around the connections being used, balancing on 2 feet becomes so natural that toddlers are soon zooming around the house. What does this have to do with pruning? Daniel Siegel, a renowned neuroscientist, calls pruning a use it or lose it effect. The brain naturally eliminates or prunes away the unused brain cells to create room for the fattier, more useful connections. This is why we have a native tongue, for example. As children, we use only the brain cells necessary to pronounce words to learn to speak our own native tongue. And by the time we're about 10, the brain cells needed to make the sounds of other languages have been pruned away. Thus, learning a new language when we're older makes us sound foreign instead of natural. So during adolescence, it's the prefrontal cortex's turn to get pruned or shed excess brain cells in order to make room for that extra fatty layer on the most used connections. Because of this, adolescence should be our cue as parents to encourage our teens to use their own prefrontal cortex as much as possible, so their brain doesn't discard important cells that are meant for mindful, independent decision making. Think of it this way. If I have a child who only knows the language of following my parental orders or resisting my parental orders, then the brain cells that are intended to learn the mindful decision-making language of, what do I think is a good choice in this situation, are at risk of getting pruned away, just like my English-speaking kids' brains have already pruned away the cells to sound like a native Chinese speaker. Knowing that we don't want mindful thinking to be a foreign concept for our kids when they finally reach adulthood, and having a desire to work with our teens as they navigate natural brain development, we at Present Parenting intentionally shift as much decision-making power as is safely possible to our teens to ensure that their prefrontal cortex, not ours, gets a big workout in weighing their choices before synaptic pruning cuts those executive skills from the team. So what do all these brain changes look like in terms of behaviors? What are the signs and symptoms that your child is entering the self-discipline stage? The physical signs of puberty can give us some obvious clues, but one aspect of puberty that often gets a bad rap, and I would love to change that, is how teens are naturally driven to feel hyper-focused on themselves. Indeed, discovering their own self, separate from their parents and family, is a huge mountain to climb, and teen brains are wired to climb it. What does a hyper-focus on self look like? Well, if you've been around teens, you've probably noticed that they tend to care a lot about how their image is perceived, mostly by their peers, and about their social status. So they spend lots more time in front of the mirror deciding what to wear and whether their hair looks good. They also tend to feel higher suspicion of rules and the intentions of the adults who make the rules because they're hyper aware of what's in it for me. They crave controlling their own schedule and despise adults who tell them what to do. And since their analytical and emotional circuits are both simultaneously strong while their PFC is still unable to provide needed balanced thinking, they spend lots of time using their skills to judge others. But that also makes them feel hyper-judged by others, including you. So I'm sure you're all wondering, how is this focus on self a good thing? In short, it's because in order to become an adult, the human brain needs to learn to feel self-motivated to take care of itself before it can adequately be truly mindful of others. As parents, we should all know this. Put on our own oxygen mask before we assist someone else, right? So even though it seems counter to mindful thinking, and it's difficult at times to be patient with years, literally years of self-absorbed thinking during the teen years, A focus on self is exactly what we should be celebrating as our kids enter puberty. And while dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that is released when we do something pleasurable and thus encourages repetitious behaviors in order to feel good again, can wreak havoc on teens whose brains are seeking primitive coping methods like nicotine, alcohol, or excessive gaming, etc., the good news is that dopamine is also circulating at its highest levels yet in the prefrontal cortex. Yes, you heard me right. Despite the massive construction zone in the prefrontal cortex during the teen years, it is also a time when teens will feel more naturally rewarded than ever in using their own prefrontal cortex. This is why teens crave autonomy instead of being controlled. So, if the laws of nature dictate that teens fixate on themselves, let's take advantage of the superpower that they have and empower them to use their prefrontal cortex to become self-disciplined of their own free will. As teens experience the thrill of making their own executive decisions about how they are going to become who they want to be, dopamine will reward them with a dose of extra determination to take another step towards mindfulness and maturity, and then another. Sadly, the opposite may also be true. If we are not mindful in the way we grant teens the autonomy that they crave, they may get stuck in their primitive brains and be tempted to use their rise in dopamine to be determined to just stay there. So during the self-discipline stage, here's an additional mindset to add to your parenting toolbox. Refrain from micromanaging your teen's decision-making. While still maintaining an awareness of behavior and a mentoring relationship, the focus is on empowering the teen to feel the weight of personal choices and consequences, as well as the burden of self-motivation required to proactively change or improve the future. Remember that early in the self-discipline stage, you won't use this mindset all the time. But when puberty hits, find as many opportunities to use it as is safely possible. Here's the accountability pyramid overview chart. Notice how many of the roles listed under the self-discipline column are now the child's sole responsibility, not yours. While you'll maintain behavioral awareness alongside your teen until they are in the independent stage, pretty much everything else in terms of daily decision making and goal setting, the motivation to act on the goals they've set, and reconciliation for mistakes they make are all on their shoulders. This might seem like a lot, and it might seem risky, but that's the point. Remember that teens crave autonomy, and by expecting them to think about the natural consequences of their choices and be motivated to do what it takes to live a good life without you pushing them along or getting in their way, you're engaging them in the healthy practice of feeling the real weight of their own behaviors, so their prefrontal cortex has to do its job. I do want to point out that a pretty big difference between the accountability stage and the self-discipline stage is the motivation to act. Remember from the accountability stage video that preteens have ramped up ability to think logically and choose right from wrong. However, without the rise in dopamine that comes with puberty, preteens struggle to feel motivated to accomplish goals without some encouragement or routine expectations from mom or dad here and there. But with puberty and the rise of dopamine, teens crave self-motivation and thus despise reminders from mom and dad. So even though teens are going to experiment with doing things that they want in the way that they want, which will likely be on a different timeline and in a different way than what you want, the self-discipline mindset says it's okay and even healthy for us as parents to take a step back in trying to motivate them ourselves and instead let them learn to take care of themselves. During the accountability stage, we used a simple mentoring cycle to begin having conversations with our child about basic goal setting and choices and natural consequences. During the self-discipline stage, the mentoring relationship continues, but I have a slightly more detailed cycle to consider as a tool to use. I hope it helps you recognize that although your teen is now primarily accountable for many aspects of their life, like maybe their daily routine or their personal hygiene or their eating habits or their study habits, their moral choices, etc., you aren't doing nothing as the parent of a teen. You still have some important jobs to do. Besides still providing for their basic temporal needs, you will need to stay aware of current issues in the world. What dangers lurk for teens in your community, or in the online circles they may have access to. You'll then need to find time to talk with your teen about those issues so they, not you, can make an informed decision about how they will proceed in life. And then you'll need to let the natural consequences play out without losing your cool. And in order to do all of this in a non-threatening way, you'll also need to find even more time to just shoot the breeze with your teen and develop a meaningful relationship with them as they experiment with becoming their own individual person. If you're busy, they'll keep their distance from you. And even if you make yourself available, they'll likely still keep their distance from you. So mentoring them during these years is no easy feat. All the personal mindfulness you practice during the early stages of the accountability pyramid is going to really come in handy. Indeed, you're definitely not doing nothing. It might sound like an impossible task to mentor someone who will be instinctively pushing away from you in order to someday become a healthy, independent adult. Let's see if an analogy can help us visualize the kind of mentoring our self-discipline stage teens need. Let's imagine that your teen's life is a playing field. If parents attempt to micromanage their teen's daily routine and basic habits, then because teens are wired to crave autonomy, they will likely picture their parents as their opponents on the playing field. Their parents' rules and regulations become the focus of playing the game. The parent tries to outsmart the teen, and the teen tries to outsmart the parent. This means there will be a winner and a loser. Teens may instinctively feel compelled to fight to win, which might look like justified rebellion in the teen's mind. Or just as difficult, teens might submit to parents' expectations and ultimately feel a loss of sense of self or a loss of confidence. However, if parents use their own prefrontal cortex to calm their own primitive instincts that would otherwise pit them against their teen, and instead intentionally choose to stand on the sidelines in the neutral zone, sometimes to cheer on and sometimes to coach their teen, then their teens have no choice but to view the game of life as teen versus the natural world. With a mentoring cycle that challenges parents to be aware of the strengths and weaknesses of their teen and the laws of nature in the world that their teen is up against, parents are acutely positioned in the game to warn their teen of pitfalls throughout the game and celebrate when their teen scores, all without getting in the way on the playing field. So think about it, parents. Do we want our teen to use their intense, chemically driven brains to conquer us, or to become skilled players in the natural world around them? If you're considering present parenting for the first time, or if you're one who likes to feel in control, then I'm guessing that the idea of granting teens decision-making power over most aspects of their life at such a risky time in their brain development feels quite uncomfortable. And to validate your feelings, it is uncomfortable. It's a lot like sitting in the passenger seat with a brand new driver navigating busy streets for the first time. Even though I try not to show it, I feel tense and wide-eyed, and my right foot can't help but press a hole right through the floor of the car. But how else is a teen supposed to learn to drive if they don't do it themselves, with just a little coaching from someone sitting next to them who has no control over the car at all? Essentially, the real-life weight of natural laws have a powerful way of teaching, and both you and your teen will feel it as you make this nerve-wracking but necessary transition. In other words, you won't need to make up consequences to control your teenager yourself, or to try to motivate them against their will. Natural laws will do that job for you. For example, while every family is unique, you'll likely avoid being the one in charge of setting a firm curfew if you want your teen to learn to assess for themselves the pros and cons of various situations. You'll also keep most comments about what they are doing or not doing to yourself, so they can be their own judges as to how the natural laws are playing out for themselves. Instead, you'll want to have healthy conversations with your teen about the natural laws and rules that already exist in your community. Like, what curfew does your city expect for teens? What are the consequences for cheating at school? Does your teen know what grades are expected in order to be accepted into the college or tech school of their choice? What about sexting and pornography laws? What about sexual assault laws or date rape laws, particularly if your teen chooses to date someone? Does your teen understand how money works in the real world? Do they understand what their future expenses will be as an adult? How can religious expectations help your teen discern right from wrong? What are some of the cultural and social norms where you live that make you good neighbors or mindful citizens? This list could go on, but I think you get the idea. So with everything in mind that we've talked about thus far, how do we even begin to talk with our teen when we are using the self-discipline mindset? In general, your response to most questions like, can I go to my friend's house? Can I buy that dress? Can I stay until after midnight? Can I skip church today? Can I watch that movie? Would be something along the lines of, you can. Let's talk about if you should, and then you can decide for yourself. It's a scary step, but also an empowering step. If you feel like your teen is ready for this mindset and you still feel nervous at first, you're probably doing it right. We find that if we are attentive, informative, and compassionate with our teens as we hand over the power to decide, their prefrontal cortex awakens and gains critical experience that, despite common teen mistakes, is highly valuable in the long run. Another common self-discipline phrase is, what's your plan? Instead of pushing our way in with our parental worries and anxiety-driven agendas, we can take the high road and be courteous in respecting the boundaries we've set in the self-discipline stage of letting our teen be the one to think through the natural consequences of their daily routines. We can politely ask them by sincerely using the phrase, hey, what's your plan? To signify our acceptance of them having the decision-making role and us having a supporter role. Here are some examples I've used in the past. Notice how they each bring attention to an issue that requires some thinking and planning, but without taking over the decision-making job. Can we talk about your schoolwork? I know you've got that big project coming up. What's your plan for fitting it into your schedule this week? What support do you need from me? Also, can you remind me which day you plan to mow the lawn this week? Or, you'll be hanging out with friends this weekend. Can we talk through a few scenarios that might come up so you can have the chance to think through it and plan how you might handle them? As you can see, in order to allow the teen's prefrontal cortex to do its job, parents wisely educate teens on choices and outcomes, but intentionally and mindfully grant them decision-making power. These two statements, you can, but do you think you should? And, hey, what's your plan? Are actually intended to give your teen freedom to choose how to proceed down the risky path of self-discovery and balance. It sends the message that mom or dad aren't going to decide who you should become. You need to search your soul and decide for yourself. It's risky and feels scary at times, but we're still right here beside you all along the way. Essentially, the primary purpose of these two phrases is to alert your teen's prefrontal cortex that it's crunch time. Mom and dad have stepped off the playing field, so get into the game, prefrontal cortex. It's only when mom and dad step back that our teen's prefrontal cortex will learn to become the new quarterback on their team who can not only score a few touchdowns, but will work with all of our teen's primitive impulses to ultimately win the game. Here are a few key concepts to consider as we conclude this introduction to the self-discipline stage: consent, honesty, and spirituality. First, how does consent play in? Similar to the beginning of the accountability stage, the risk of handing over the reins of decision-making is higher for some choices than others. If your child is nearing the self-discipline stage, start thinking about which decisions and the responsibility to act with self-motivation to follow through with those decisions would help your teen's prefrontal cortex grow. Obviously, if you really feel like your teen's safety is at stake, then step in and take the lead, even without consent. I also encourage you to seek professional advice for concerns about mental health issues or challenges with addictions. But in the majority of common teen cases, the self-discipline mindset would expect you to seek your child's consent in supporting them instead of just stepping in to take over without their permission. Some consent examples might include, hey, you've slept through your alarm a couple days in a row. Would you like me to check in on you tomorrow morning to make sure you're awake? Or, I've been reading lots of studies about how excessive phone use is causing mental health issues in people, especially teens. Can we talk about a plan to make sure your phone habits are safe? Or, how do you feel about your grade in chemistry? Would you like my help in exploring tutoring options? Frequently using phrases that honor our teen's consent proves to our teen that we respect their ability to use their own prefrontal cortex. Another key principle during the self-discipline stage is to encourage honesty over perfection. Help your teen know and feel that if they make a mistake, you'll be grateful for their honesty about it. Just like the bumpers coming down in the bowling analogy from the accountability stage, of course, perfection in throwing strikes is unattainable as they learn the laws of nature. And with natural laws dictating the primary consequences for their choices, your teen shouldn't be afraid of your punishment or emotion when they make mistakes. Yes, they may witness your disappointment as part of your natural response, but as a present parent, you'll be well versed in gaining your composure so your disappointment doesn't turn into anger or ongoing resentment. Rather, you can simply be a mindful source of support alongside them, with their consent, as they face the natural consequences of their choices. Finally, encourage but don't force spirituality. Spiritual practices have been proven to increase brain balance and mindfulness, and your teen should know that seeking peace and guidance from a being higher than themselves will help them build their inner compass and will strengthen them in handling the many pressures of adult life. Encourage them to choose several personal practices that will increase their spirituality. Share your own experiences with them. Spirituality can also assist us as parents during this gut-wrenching stage. As someone who believes in God myself, after years of offering my child my unconditional attachment love, my modeling leadership example, and my mindful accountability mentoring, it is my hope and peace of mind that my parenting ultimately points my kids to God, because He will be there for them when I can't be, and will guide them much better than I can as they become their own person. I know this all sounds good and dreamy in theory, having a teen that makes their own mindful decisions, but I'll be the first to say that it's difficult and rocky in practice. It's a roller coaster. The teen years are a complex time. Discipline should not be black and white. Rather, more than ever, it takes careful mindfulness to discern which disciplinary mindset to use in each moment during these delicate years. My best piece of advice is to keep seeking for your own peaceful heart and then follow it. You know your child best, and if you feel at peace, then you'll know how much weight your child's brain can carry in a given situation in order to make progress. As always, thank you for your precious time and attention today. I hope you feel inspired to continue on this present parenting journey. Keep learning, keep trying. Together, we can change the world, one child and one present moment at a time.